Welcome Wargamers to my Start Collecting Box review for the Skinks. Now essentially in these videos, if it's your first time, we talk about the actual contents of the box, we review the various war scrolls that come with it, how to kind of use these units in a game, and then really just drive home the question, is this a good place to start for the faction that it's representing? Now one thing I want to add here, it's called Start Collecting Skinks, but the units here are part of the Seraphan army. They just have multiple boxes and this is just one of them. So without further ado, let's jump in. Included in this box, you get one Kingstar Priest, 12 Skinks, there's the basic unit, 3 pterodon riders, which could also be built as Ripperdactyls, those are the flying units, and 1 bastillodon, which can be armed with either a Arc of Sotek or solar engine. Now starting with a bird's eye view, just kind of taking a look at the box for what it is, you can absolutely see why this is a good value. By that I mean, just look at the units in it and just imagine if it's on the shelf, somebody who doesn't know anything about Age of Sigmar walks in, they see this box, these units are fire, right? They're just awesome. You got a big old dino, you got a bunch of little guys kind of creeping around him, some very dynamic flying models, no matter which option you choose really, and a hero to go with them. Now I'm a huge fan of talking about how they get you started in playing a faction, and I really do think this does pretty well because you get, a big heavy hitter in the Bastillodon. He's not going to go away very fast, those smaller point games anyway. You have Skinks, which are great for capturing objectives and kind of tying up the enemy. Pterodon, the flyers basically, are just really great models. I'm not too keen on them in terms of units, but we'll get to that in a second. And I love the fact that you get a hero. This of course means you get a hero and 1 battle line in the Skinks, but keep in mind the Skinks are only battle line if you're actually playing a seraphan army. If you go like Grand Alliance Order, they are no longer that. So with all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and take a look at the war scrolls themselves and kind of dig into the units themselves, see what they bring to the table. Alright, so here we are checking out the Skinks box. You can see, like I said before, great looking set of models, just the kind of thing that just captures someone when they first walk into the store. And we're going to kick it off, as I always like to do, talking about the hero. Now this is mainly because the hero provides a lot of synergies and that kind of stuff typically for an army, and they act as a really good focal point to make everything else better. So we're going to keep his abilities in mind as we're looking at other units. Now the Kingstar Priest has a movement of 8. This is great because Skinks tend to be a little bit faster than other types of units from different armies, and I love that quite a bit. He has 5 wounds, only a 5-up save because they are tiny and squishy, and they die to a stiff breeze, and a bravery 6, but as he's a hero, the bravery won't matter a ton. For weapons, he has 1 ranged weapon and 1 melee weapon. The missile weapon is called the Venom Bolt. It's got an 18-inch range, 2 attacks, 3s to hit, 3s to wound, -1 rend, and 1 damage. Now his melee weapon is the Serpent Staff, 1-inch range, 2 attacks, 4s to hit, 3s to wound, -1 rend, and 1 damage. That profile is pretty similar to pretty much everything other wizards do throughout other factions, but that gun he has, the Venom Bolt, is actually a fairly good to hit and to wound, so yeah, that's a pretty good one. Now as far as his abilities go, big one here is Astral Herald. At the start of your hero phase, roll a dice for this model. On a 5-up, you receive 1 command point. Now I can't tell you enough how important that actually is. Command points in this game, once you start getting into your battle tome and using more and more abilities that they have, really do become quite meaningful. They're just a resource to let you do extra abilities to magnify and force multiply what your army does. So if you have good command abilities that you can work with the rest of the faction, these become quite good. Now his next ability is called the Serpent Staff. In your hero phase, you can pick 1 friendly seraphan unit wholly within 12 inches of this model. If you do so, until your next hero phase, if the unmodified wound roll for an attack made by that unit is 6, that attack inflicts 1 mortal wound on the target in addition to any normal damage. A unit cannot benefit from this ability more than once per phase. Now this is important for a few reasons. One, anytime you can dish out extra mortal wounds is fantastic. It's only on a 6, but here's the thing. In this army, not necessarily just in this box, there are tons of units that have multiple weapon profiles. So for example, a common one would be just the basic Saurus warrior. He can walk up and he can stab you and then bite you. And so having multiple profiles gives you higher chances of getting 6s on the wound roll. Now for this set specifically, the Bastillodon has multiple attack profiles. The Skinks, their whole thing when it comes to attacking is by weight of dice, which is this, kind of something that works really well with this ability. It's actually really good. The only caveat being you have to have the unit close to the Skinks Priest at the beginning. And he is also a wizard, and this unique spell he has is Blazing Starlight. Casting value 6, that's really easy to cast. Pick one enemy unit within 18 inches of the caster and visible to them. Until your next hero phase, subtract 1 from hit rolls for attacks made by that unit. That is brutal, because there are so many units that hit on 4s in this game that making it go to a 5 is mathematically very significant. And so that's actually a really big spell. It's a great debuff. And that's kind of, to some extent, what Skinks are really good at, is kind of taking their bigger opponents down a peg. All in all, he's a fantastic hero to bring with the box. The only thing he's missing that I wish was there is a command ability. Now, of course, there are command abilities in the base rules that every hero can use. My favorite being you basically spend a command point and you can turn a run roll into a 6 rather than just, d6, whatever it is. But he does make a fantastic hero because, with the ranged attack, he can contribute, he can do things, as well as that wizard debuff is fantastic. He's there with the serpent staff buffing one unit that you take with him. I just really, really do like that. He's a fantastic choice to put in a Star Collecting box. And next we're going to move on to the Skinks. Now, just like their hero counterpart, 8-inch move, they only have 1 wound each and a 6-up save because they are made of paper. Bravery 5, and that's important because they are typically a horde unit, and so there will be instances where bravery does really significantly matter. Now, you're going to see 4 weapon profiles here, but they don't get to choose all of them. Okay, so I'm going to read the description here. Has any number of models. The unit is armed with one of the following: Meteoric Javelin, Celestite Dagger, and the Star Buckler. That means they have a javelin, a little shiv in their pocket, and the shield. They could also have the Bolt Spitter and Moonstone Club, the Bolt Spitter, a Celestite Dagger, and the Star Buckler, or Moonstone Club and Star Buckler. That's a lot of different options. Very wordy. Hate when that stuff happens, to be perfectly honest with you. What I would just simply suggest is pick a roll, either be ranged or be melee. And they're not great at either, but again, weight of dice is just kind of the name of the game for them. So pick a roll that they can do, and then build the whole unit out to be like that. So here's what I mean. If you want them to focus on the Bolt Spitter, you got 2 weapon options that'll allow you to do that. Pick whichever one you like. But let's go through here. So I'm just going to go through the weapons, and you can choose whatever combination you want. The Meteoric Javelin is when he hucks that long javelin in the air, only an 8-inch range. 1 attack each, 5s to hit, 4s to wound, no rend, 1 damage. Again, not super killy. The Bolt Spitter has a longer range, 16 inches, 1 attack, 5s to hit, 5s to wound. And that might not be a bad choice if you really focus on horde units and you're going for, say, the Serpent Staff ability that lets you 6s to wound, do mortal wounds. And that way you can kind of make up for some of the really bad dice rolls you have to kind of nail to be able to get these guys to do anything. As for the melee weapons, you have the Celestite Dagger, which is 1-inch range, 1 attack, 5s to hit, 5s to wound, no rend, 1 damage. And lastly, the Moonstone Club, which is 1-inch range, 1 attack, 4s to hit, 4s to wound, and 1 damage. Now, one model in this unit can be the Alpha, and you can designate that however you want, but you add 1 to the attacks characteristic of its melee weapons. Again, minor buff, just get your hero up there in the front, and then their abilities are kind of where it begins to matter a bit more how you deck them out. Swarming Cohort. We have add 1 to the attacks characteristic of weapons, not melee or missile, just weapons in general, used by this unit while it has 15 or more models. Now do remember, in Age of Sigmar, you can shoot at the unit that you are in combat with. So that means, say someone runs into a horde of 30 skinks, right? They're going to be able to get 2 shots with their ranged weapon, whichever one they have, and 2 shots with each of their melee weapons, depending on how they're kitted out. That does equal a lot of dice being rolled. And so when you think about how 6s to wound, because the Serpent Staff can make mortal wounds, you begin to see how that math kind of pans out. It's a lot of dudes all in combat. And their last ability here is the Star Buckler. So if you chose any of those weapon loadouts that have the shield, they call it the Star Buckler, you get to add 1 to their save rolls, which brings them up to a slightly more respectable 5-up, but honestly, they're gonna die regardless. So kind of think about that on your own, what you want them to look like or do in their role, but they do have some way of improving their save characteristic. All in all, I'm going to level with you. These guys are born to die, like straight up. Seraphan, if you want to lean into Skinks, one of the great things about them is the skink units are great, fast-moving meat shields. They move up and they tie up things that can take out your more valuable pieces, like the other units in this box. And so these guys seem really sad and weak and they're going to die. That's just going to happen, right? That's their role. But as long as they die, protecting the more important things, the real heavy hitters in this faction, then you know you're doing well. And so just kind of keep that in mind. You're going to be spending a lot of time pulling these guys off the table. Do not feel salty about it. As long as they're defending important stuff, they're doing their job. Now, the next 2 we're going to talk about here, you get 1 kit that can be built 2 different ways. We have the Ripperdactyls and the Pterodon Riders. And so we're going to kick it off talking about the Ripperdactyls here. So they have a 12-inch move, 3 wounds each, and you do get 3 of them in a unit in this particular box, and so that's going to be 9 wounds total. They have a 5-up save and 5 bravery. Now for weapons, they only have melee options, and the first one is going to be the Moonstone War Spear. This is what the rider itself stabs you with. He has a 1-inch range, 1 attack, 4s to hit, 4s to wound, no rend, and 1 damage. And the other one is the bite of the actual mount itself, the Ripperdactyl itself. Tearing Jaws. 1-inch range as well, 3 attacks, 4s to hit, 3s to wound, no rend, and 1 damage. But that all sounds kind of sad except for the fact that he's fast, but the abilities here are what really bring him to life. So let's go through here. The unit of Ripperdactyls is any number of models, and they're each armed with the War Spear. They can fly, which is a fantastic rule, so you can rush these guys up a side or over terrain, over the enemy units, that kind of thing. And one of them can be the Alpha, which is just you get an extra attack with your War Spear. Not super impressive. But things become a lot more interesting when you get into this rule called the Blot Toad. Okay, you receive 1 Blot Toad marker for each Ripperdactyl Rider's unit in your army. Why does that matter? Well, let's go to the abilities here. Toad Rage. I'm going to read this flavor text because I love it. The mere scent of a blot toad sends Ripperdactyls into a frenzy. It is no coincidence that these diminutive creatures seem to materialize whenever the winged beasts are near. At the start of the combat phase, you can set up 1 blot toad marker next to 1 enemy unit. If you do so, you can re-roll hit rolls for attacks made with tearing jaws by friendly Ripperdactyl units that are wholly within 6 inches of that enemy unit. At the end of the combat phase, remove the blot toad marker. It cannot be used again in the battle. And it clarifies here the designer's note, the blot toads, they're not units, they're just markers to designate that you can do that ability at one point. Now this is incredibly significant. The wording of this you have to pay attention to. You get 1 blot toad for every one of these units that you bring in your army. And you don't put them on the board until the beginning of a combat phase. What that means is, say you had 2 units of Ripperdactyls, okay? They're going into the same unit. One turn, one of them can use the blot toad, and now both of them, because they're within 6 inches of that same unit, get the ability to re-roll hit rolls on their big bites, which we're going to see later are actually quite good. But here's the thing, you got 1 blot toad for each unit, even though you don't have to use them at the same time. What that means is, in the next combat phase, which could be in your turn or your opponent's, the other unit can drop their blot toad. And so you can see really quickly how all of a sudden, the more you take of them, the more opportunities you get like this. Now, of course, sending them at the same target is where you kind of maximize the effectiveness of the toad thing. However, you don't have to do that. It's just a really cool option. So all in all, it's a pretty stinking cool thing that you can do. It makes it a really interesting I don't know, way of like using multiple units of these guys. So just kind of keep that in mind. It's not something, you know, what this essentially means if you only have the Start Collecting Box is once per game you get, you know, reroll hit rolls because you only have one blot toad marker. But when you start expanding your collection, you get more of them. That's where these little tiny tricks and that kind of thing really begin to matter. Now, it's at the start of the combat phase when you put your blot toad marker down, and so this is also a thing when you get more comfortable with the larger scale games, is you can start playing games with your opponent. By that I mean, will you or will you not put a blot toad marker on a very vital unit of theirs that you have put a unit of Ripperdactyls on? Remember, it's either your turn or your opponent's. Doesn't matter. It's a combat phase, period, general, whatever. And so you can look at this and kind of create threats for your opponent, like, oh, do they want to attack here first, you know, and get rid of the Ripperdactyls, or is there something more vital? And so that's kind of where you can start playing mind games with your opponent, and it becomes very, very cool. And their last ability just takes all the stuff we just talked about and magnifies it. Are you ready? If the unmodified hit roll for an attack made with Tearing Jaws is 6, that attack scores 2 hits on the target instead of 1. You're still going to make a wound and save roll for each. And so with this, it just increases your chance of getting those 6s, more attacks, it kind of explode into doubles. You can just see what I mean. So the way that you play with these guys can be very, very dodgy depending on how many units you have and how you coordinate the use of those toads. Now the next one here are the pterodons, okay? Pterodons have a 16-inch move, so they are significantly faster. 3 wounds each still. They go down to a 6-up save with 5 bravery. Now, when it comes to weapons, they do have missile weapon options. You have to choose one of these two. The first one is the Star Strike Javelin, 12-inch range, 2 attacks, 4s to hit, 3s to wound, no rend and 1 damage. Or the Sun Leech Bolas, 6-inch range, so much, much closer, but they get D6 attacks, 4s to hit, 3s to wound, no rend and 1 damage. Right off the gate, for me personally, I appreciate consistency, so I would lean the Sunstrike Javelin route, but I understand some people just, they love rolling those 6s, and remember, you have equal odds of getting a 1 and a 6, so even though you see D6 and you're like, oh, getting excited for all these attacks that you can throw, truth of the matter is, it averages about 9. Something like that, so don't get like too excited. You know, you're going to have those dice spikes, but just as many times you're going to roll triple 1s, so kind of keep that in mind. Regardless of what ranged weapon you choose, the actual pterodon itself attacks with razor-sharp jaws, has 1-inch range, 4 attacks, 4s to hit, 4s to wound, no rend, and 1 damage. Of course, this one can also fly, but that 16-inch speed is incredible. Okay, it's a really great movement stat. Each unit of these can have one of their riders be an alpha, and he gets 1 attack added to his missile weapon, whichever one you chose, and they have exactly 1 ability, Deadly Cargo. Once per battle, after this unit finishes a move, you can pick 1 enemy unit and roll 1 dice for each model in this unit that passed across any models from that unit. For each 4-up, that unit suffers D3 mortal wounds. Now this is an interesting one. He has the speed to be able to get across the board and easily get across many units in the game, okay? Because you have to end outside 3 inches, remember that. But the truth of the matter is, like, with that kind of speed, especially if you like run or something, you can get across darn near anything. You can also zigzag, so you can tag different units and stuff like that. The point being, you are going to have no problem getting that ability off. However, remember, there's only 3 guys in this unit base. So what is that, 3D? So you have to 3 dice on a 4-up. Let's say you get lucky and 2 out of the 3, it's a little bit above average, are D3 mortal wounds. You roll those, you're looking at about 2 mortal wounds. It's a lot of dice rolling to do like 2 to 3 mortal wounds, something like that. What I would say to you is if you want an easier war scroll, this is definitely more simple, right? They're great little scouts. It's only once per game that they can do the boulder drop, but after that, they're not doing a whole lot of damage. Those weapon profiles, no matter which weapon you choose, are not super inspiring. So just kind of think about it a little bit. If I had to choose between the 2 units, personally, I would go with the Ripperdactyls. I like the models, and I love the shenanigans you can do with the toads later on. Now, of course, that, like I said before, that only matters when you start having more and more of those units, but nonetheless, the ability to kind of mess with your opponent is there. This kit, like with these two options, used to be the scourge of the last Seraphan book, and so this iteration of them, the new current book that they have, has really toned them down quite a bit. They still have roles, but they're much more kind of niche. And the last War Scroll we're going to talk about today is the Bastillodon, and I love this guy. He's got a bunch of different stuff. Now, if you're new to Age of Sigmar, he has what's called a damage table, which is larger units. Their stats change as they take damage. And so you look here, it says wounds suffered, and we're going to start as if he had not suffered any wounds, okay? So starting with that, he has a movement of 5, 10 wounds total, a 6 bravery, which, he's a single model, doesn't quite matter. And his save is a dash sign, okay? That's because his save changes as he gets hurt. He starts off with a 1+ save. Now, be very, very clear about this. If you're rolling for your saves, a 1 always fails no matter what, even if he has a 1+. What this is saying is things with rend or mortal wounds have to get through those first 2 wounds or so to be able to raise his profile to where he can start accruing damage normally. It's just, all it's doing is saying you have to have rend or some mortal wounds to get through the first ones. But that is an incredible start, especially for a model that's small. You can put multiples in your army. So actually starting off at a 1+, super, super good. Now, as far as his weapons go, he's armed with a few things. Every Bastillodon, no matter how you kit them out, comes with meteoric javelins. Those are the skinks on his back that are like hucking the little javelins at people. And the bludgeoning tail. This is the literal tail of the beast itself. But beyond that, you have a choice between one called the Solar Engine, which is a ranged attack, and one called the Arc of Sotek, which is a melee attack. And so we're going to go through all the profiles, and I'll give you my thoughts here at the end on what exactly I suggest. So, starting off with the Solar Engine. This is what you see in the picture here, the big crystal on his back. 24-inch range, which is the longest range we've seen in this, start collecting box since. The attacks is dash. They start at a 9 and go down to 5 as he accrues damage. To hit is a 4-up, 3-up to wound, -1 rend, and 2 damage. Now that's a pretty stellar gun, so to speak. If you're looking at it, enough's going to go through. Honestly, with multi-damage weapons, I just love them because not as many shots have to actually go through to do the same amount of damage as, say, like a large horde of troops, that kind of thing. Next up is the Meteor Javelins, which we kind of saw before from the Skinks. 4 attacks, 8-inch range because they're not throwing them super far, 5s to hit, 4s to wound, no rend, and 1 damage. Now as for the melee attacks, remember you're choosing between the Solar Engine, which is like a 24-inch, I'm going to call it a sniper rifle of sunbeams, and the Arc of Sotek. So the Arc of Sotek has a 3-inch ranged attack, which is fantastic for reaching out and hitting heroes behind sort of like a wall of units. The attacks are also dependent upon how many wounds he suffered, so it starts all the way up at 18. That is a bucket of dice, okay? From that, though, they hit on 4s. They're going to wound on a 6. Okay, that's the kicker right there. They wound on a 6 with no rend and 1 damage. Regardless of which weapon option you took, he also gets the Bludgeoning Tail, 2-inch range weapon, still great to have longer range melee attacks, 3 attacks, 3s to hit, 3s to wound, -1 rend, and D3 damage. That's a great profile. Like, I love it. Now what's important to keep in mind is that those weapons also come with abilities, okay? So if you go with the Solar, what is it called? The Solar Engine, they get the Light of the Heavens. Add 1 to the damage inflicted by successful attack made with solar engines that target a Chaos Demon unit. Now that might sound hyper-specific, but here's the thing, in the current iteration of the game, that does account for quite a few very important units in the game. So for example, you're going to see a lot of Vermin Lords. The Plague, the Nurgle version of the Vermin Lord is quite prominent. He's a fantastic spellcaster, to be honest with you. Slanesh is still lurking at the top tables, sniping out demons. Remember, it's Chaos Demons, but sometimes you'll be surprised by exactly what units have the demon keyword. For example, like in Nurgle, you wouldn't expect the mortal dudes riding flies to have them, but the flies, whatever their mount is, if it's a demon, gives them the demon keyword. So even though you're shooting at a mortal dude, they are still demons. So kind of keep in mind, if you don't know, if you're playing against any Chaos faction, I would definitely ask your opponent who has the demon keyword just to verify before you start. because that is savage. Now, the other one is more related to the Arc of Sotek. If the unmodified hit roll for an attack made with an Arc of Sotek is 6, that attack inflicts 1 mortal wound on the target and the attack sequence ends. So essentially, if you get him in there on full health, you're rolling 18 dice. I wouldn't necessarily count on that, but let's just go with the math here. You're rolling 18 dice, and any 6s to hit are doing a mortal wound, and you don't even have to worry about rolling a wound roll afterwards. They just go straight through, and then everything else has to wound on a 6. I'll be honest with you. This is my favorite unit that comes in the box, and I can't really see a compelling reason to take the Arc of Sotek over the Solar Engine. He's already got a really sweet melee attack with the big sweeping tail, and at the same time, remember, you can shoot in combat, like I said before, so this javelins are being thrown at him, the solar beam is shooting him in the face like Bulbasaur style, and his tail's whipping people. I just don't think the Arc of Sotek brings a lot. Remember, 18 dice, only at his full health, okay? So you have to protect him like in bubble wrap by the time he gets there, but let's say you do. 18 dice, the average for rolling 6s, 3 dice. So it's 3 mortal wounds, and then everything else has to then hit on a 4, and then wound on a 6 with no rend 1 damage. It just doesn't, like, you can feel excited about rolling a bucket of dice, but at the same time, it's not doing a whole lot. Whereas the Solar Engine, I feel like, will do things more throughout the time that you play it. So in terms of, like, you know, feeling the most fun from the units that you take, I just think that the Solar Engine delivers, and the Arc of Sotek is a cool idea, it just doesn't quite do it. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. If there is a compelling argument for taking the Arc of Sotek, I would genuinely love to see it in the comments below. Thank you all so much. Okay, so let's put this all together in context when we talk about the value of the box. The truth of the matter is, seraphan is a massive army range. Like, in terms of just the sheer number of units they have a lot of options compared to many other AOS factions. Now, this is taking the approach of focusing on one of those little sub-factions, the Skinks, obviously. The thing I would say about this is, if you love Skinks, buy 2 of these, no question. It's a fantastic value for the box. The bastillodons are awesome. Then you would have multiple of the Ripperdactyls. They'll start doing some of that cool, you know, toad shenanigans that I talked about before. You have now 2 priests that they're awesome. I mean, they're fantastic, you know, mages. They have the ability to try and get more command points. What I would really say is go for 2 boxes of this, and then pick 1 unit from their roster that you like the command ability of, because then you're starting to accrue commanded points through the various Skinks, and now you have something to really use them outside of just the basic 3 that everybody has. The truth is, there's a part of star collecting boxes that I really focus on, which is, do they draw new people in, and then do they deliver on that, right? And this is one that, like, you see on a shelf, and if you like dinos, like, you want this box. Like, it's just freaking cool. And so I'm really excited about it. The models are so dynamic and that kind of stuff. I think it's a home run in terms of visual excitement. Someone doesn't know what army they want to play? Boom, there it is. Now, does it deliver on that is kind of the second part of this video, and it's asking basically 2 simple questions. Is it a good start to the faction, and does it represent the faction that it's trying to get you into? So first question here, do they represent the army of seraphan well? And I would say absolutely. You got dinosaurs, multiples, because you have the guys riding the dinosaurs, and you have the bastillodon itself, and then a whole bunch of Skinks. But keep in mind, like I said before, seraphan is a huge roster, and so there's a lot of different looking kinds. You know, mostly there's the Skinks and then the Saurus, which are larger, tougher, upright, and so it kind of depends on how you want to look at it. I can't really see like one box at this value point that would, you know, represent the entire faction. But if you're talking about breaking them up into sub-factions, like GW did, of the Saurus box and the Skinks one, I think they nailed it, right? I think this is exactly what you want in Skinks. You got a cool Skink hero, a unit of Skinks, and then a bunch of them riding various dinosaurs, which is like, what more do you want? The second part is, are these units specifically good in the game? And by that I mean, I don't just mean competitive, I mean, if you were to play seraphan for several years and collect all the bits and bobs, would you actually use these units? And for that, it's kind of a harder one to answer. simply because the Seraphan Battle Tome is an incredible book with so many different playstyles supported. You can go dino heavy, in which case, yeah, you do absolutely use the bastillodons, and to make room for as many big monsters as you can, skinks are the cheapest choice. Absolutely, why not? If you want to focus on magic heavy, you're absolutely going to be using the Skinks Priests pretty much regardless. That's just a fantastic unit in this army. And then the pterodon riders and the Ripperdactyls, those are the ones that, like, you might not. It depends on how gimmicky you want to be with those toads. So that's kind of like the wild card, I would say. But if you're dead set on using them, there is absolutely ways to get good mileage out of them. Again, it's one of those things, like, it's just hard to tell you, yes, you'll always use these, because the playstyles are so radically different throughout the book. And I love that. That's a positive. It accommodates for all the different things that you might think are awesome. It just gets a little bit hard to tell you exactly yes or no, these are good or they're bad. I mean, I can tell you the Skinks Priest is awesome, the Bastillodon's a baller, and Skinks are just a fantastic battle line choice because they just clog up the enemy. Again, their role is to be there doing just that. They're gonna die in droves, they're not gonna kill a whole lot, but they sacrifice themselves so that the Bastillodon can target the right heroes, the Skinks Priest is casting spells, and some of your heavy hitters are coming in from the sides. All that to say, I think it's a fantastic box. Like, if I was going to get into Seraphan, I'm not a huge fan of the Saurus models. I would probably go the way of the Skinks. I would focus on a skink heavy, like, thematic army. There's a sub-faction that really rewards you for taking quite a few of them, and I would probably lean that way. For me personally, if I was going to get into a skink army like I just talked about, I would probably grab 2 of these boxes, and then maybe like a hero that I think a command ability would benefit from having all those command points, as well as maybe more skinks, like just standalone skinks, just to kind of fill up the ranks a little bit and kind of work out your battle line. So that's my suggestion. If you are a Seraphan player and you know this battle tome really well, I would love your opinion and your thoughts. Now, when I do these videos, the most helpful comment for new people, I always pin it to the top, so go ahead and check it down to see if anybody has left something like that. I would love to hear feedback, because once you get the battle tome, which is something I don't really cover in these kinds of videos, we're talking about the Start Collecting Box as a product. Once you get the battle tome, you're immediately faced with a whole bunch of decisions. There's so many ways to play this faction, right? If you're coming off of my lore series, some Seraphan are like ethereal star beings, some are like more tangible, vicious monsters. There's 2 whole different playstyles for those, and then sub-factions within them. It's just insanity. So if you're not sure what you'd like, go ahead, look at the comments below, as well as all different kinds of wikis and stuff like that exist. Figure out what you like to do in the game, and honestly, this box has some great ways to accommodate most ways to play, because cheap troops, cool dinos with a sniper rifle strapped to his back, and the Skinks Priest are units that are just rewarding no matter what kind of army you want to construct. So anyway, friends, thank you all so much for watching and tuning in. Let me know which one you'd like to see next. Once I finish all of the Start Collecting boxes I have not yet reviewed, I'm going to go back and actually redo the older ones to kind of try and keep this series up to date. Thank you all so much for watching, and happy wargaming. Hey everybody, I hope you enjoyed that video. It was made possible by the folks over here to the left. These are my top supporters over here on YouTube and on Patreon that keep this channel going. If you'd like to learn more about how to become a supporter and get some cool things in the process, like exclusive pictures and interactions with me, and get your questions answered here on the channel, go ahead and click any of the links down below or the join button on the community page over on YouTube. Regardless of your choice, I wanted to thank you so much for joining me with this video, and I look forward to seeing you in my next one. Happy wargaming.